Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Josiah Pits. I'm your host, and today we have a collection of stories that will make you laugh, cry, and gasp in disbelief. Our video is titled Betrayal, Deception, and Family Tragedy, Shocking Stories of Love and Lies. These stories are filled with unexpected twists, outrageous behavior, and some seriously entertaining drama. But before we dive into these wild stories, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest fun and shocking uploads. If you liked today's video, don't forget to like it and share your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, let's dive into it. This video includes 4 stories. The first story is My in-laws disowned us for refusing to name our baby after a deceased relative. My fiancé, 27 male, and I, 25 female, have an infant son. We're overjoyed at being parents, but most of my in-laws refuse to even see our baby because of our decision concerning his name. My in-laws have a tradition of giving the firstborn son of every generation the same name. Let's say it's Peter. This has been going on for about 7 generations already, and they're very serious about it. My fiancé's eldest cousin was the latest person to get named Peter. Every one of his cousins has only had daughters so far, so our baby is the first son of his generation and consequently should get the name. I have no problem with the name Peter, and I would have been okay with naming my son that. Unfortunately, that was also my uncle's name, who died before I was born. I won't get into details, but it was tragic and traumatizing for my family. My father never got over losing his younger brother. My grandmother asked the family not to name any of our future children Peter during her lifetime. My mother-in-law and father-in-law knew about this promise and, at first, seemed to be not only okay with us avoiding the name Peter, but also supportive of the one we chose. However, my grandmother sadly passed away when I was 7 months pregnant. We traveled for her funeral. On our last days there, my in-laws called to offer me their condolences. Then my mother-in-law asked me if I would think about the name Peter now. Suddenly, they were insistent that the name we chose was awful, and we had to honor their tradition. According to them, they only had agreed to make an exception for us for my grandmother's sake and had no obligation to keep it now that she had passed. My family agrees that, while we don't have to avoid the name anymore, it still doesn't feel right to use it. My fiancé also agrees with me, but his parents spent the last weeks of my pregnancy trying to convince us to change our minds about the name. When our baby was born and we named him what we wanted, my in-laws were furious that we had broken a 7-generation-old family tradition. Some of them hadn't previously wanted to name their sons Peter, but did it anyway for the family's sake. They said our decision was selfish and that my family should have moved on by now. This has nothing to do with whether my family's moved on. It just felt like a betrayal of my grandmother and uncle's memories to even consider using the name. My father-in-law offered us $1,000 to change our son's name to Peter after he was born. That was 2 months ago, and neither of my fiancé's parents have met the baby or seen us since I was pregnant. Most of my in-laws are on their side, and this is causing a huge rift between my fiancé and his family. He assures me he's fine, but I'm starting to feel really guilty about this. Am I the idiot? Edit. The tradition started, as far as I know, when OG Peter died and his son, also named Peter, named his firstborn after his father. Peter III had the first son of the following generation and did the same thing. That one died before having children, so his sister gave the name to her son, and so on. The name Peter is very common in my country, and none of them ever get bullied over it, and the fact that it was also my uncle's name isn't as unlikely as one might think. Also, middle names aren't used in my country. Most people get the maternal surname before the paternal one instead. Some hadn't wanted to name their kid but did it for the family's sake. Have you broken a pact with Satan or something? Not the idiot. Family name traditions are weird. You can do whatever you want and name your baby. Keep pushing the "I'm honoring my late grandmother's final wishes" part so they see how unhinged they sound, asking you to flout this. Lunatics should never be around babies or kids or me or you. Seriously? Do you live on the set of Dynasty? Ugh. Also, as a grandma, the idea of rejecting a child based on a name is simply trifling. It's downright shallow, petty, and a horrid representation of one's integrity. Honestly, the longer these people avoided my child, the less their value would be worth in my child's life. Who would want such people around after a while? What would they bring to the table for my child? How would people like this positively enrich their development? I feel bad for Opie's partner as this behavior surely has hurt him. As an aside, once again, tradition is a euphemism for misogyny. Note only male children have a special name and all the female children were not fought over. Presumably, no one cared what they were called. All the more reason to end this now. Update: am I the idiot for breaking my fiancé's family tradition by naming my son what I wanted? Thank you so much to everyone who commented and offered support. A lot has happened since, so I'd like to give you an update. About a week after my post, my fiancé's parents contacted us. They apologized for their behavior and begged me to meet my son. They said they were ready to leave the naming debacle behind and truly wanted to be involved in their grandson's life. We were skeptical, but invited them over to meet the baby. The visit went well. They began coming over almost every day during the next 3 weeks. I noticed neither of them ever called my son by his name, but I didn't point it out. Things seemed good for the first time in months between my fiancé and his parents. One day, my fiancé was helping my father-in-law with something at our place, so my mother-in-law and I went to the park with my baby. I had to go to the bathroom sometime later, so I left him in the stroller with her. When I returned, she was sitting on a park bench, chatting with a woman who was cooing over my son, so I went over there and introduced myself as Sunname's mom, and she said, "Oh, I thought his name was Peter." I didn't say a word, and neither did my mother-in-law. She followed me to the car, and we went back to my apartment. On the way there, I texted my fiancé about what had happened. When we arrived, he kicked both his parents out of our place. He'd read my text and confronted his father. Thankfully, my father-in-law is a terrible liar and confessed immediately. Apparently, both my in-laws only call my son Peter. That includes whenever they're talking about him, every time they introduce him to someone else, and even baby talking to him on the few occasions that they were left alone with him. Neither of them is embarrassed by this and thinks they're in the right. We're heartbroken, especially my fiancé, not only because his parents can't let go of their pride, but also because the name we chose for our son means a lot to both of us. I blame myself for encouraging my fiancé to allow them near our son. I was raised in a different city than all my grandparents, and I always wished they could have been more involved in my life. Losing my grandmother didn't help. Pretty much every doubt I had only existed because I thought it would be important for my son to grow up with all of his parents around. But now all my guilt is gone. They don't deserve to be in his life if they can't respect my son enough to call him by his name. I hope they enjoyed the 3 weeks they had with their grandson, because that's all they're getting until they get their heads out of their butts. Yikes! Are they this psychotic and unhinged about other things in life, or just this one issue? What a weird hill for them to die on. We can be grateful you found this out now, because if you play your cards right, by the time they see your son again, he'll know his name. According to my fiancé, they've always been a little entitled, but I never really saw them enough to be able to say that. When the lady from the park asked about his name, it did cross my mind that she might think I was a kidnapper. However, his name is written on one of his blankets, which calmed me down a little. Still, I can't help but think of what my mother-in-law would have done had the woman threatened to call the cops. I seriously can't wrap my head around this. They're throwing away a son, a grandson, future grandchildren, and a daughter-in-law. family members that some people would give anything to have. That's the real atrocity. That's something for them to feel ashamed about. That's literally so tacky and disgusting of them. I'm sure your husband is so embarrassed and ashamed that his family's being this way. He probably feels guilty, but it's so hurt. I'm so sorry, Opie. Wow, just wow. We recently moved in with my in-laws because I'm 31 weeks pregnant with our first child, and I feel like I need my mother-in-law for support since I've been pretty terrified the entire third trimester and my parents don't live nearby. My husband didn't want to move in with them, and the only reason he did was that I told him I'd go without him and he could stay in our home alone until after the baby's born. His parents are great and very close, so that's not why he didn't want to temporarily move in with them. We've thought about it a lot before we moved. We're still arguing about it now because he thinks it wasn't necessary. I'm stressing over nothing, which maybe I am, but that doesn't magically make the stress disappear. He's said multiple times that I forced him to move here, but he could have stayed at our house like I said. I can't expect my mother-in-law to visit every day, and I feel better in a house with other people around. My husband does sometimes work from home, but he's usually holed up in his office, so it's like he's not here anyway, so this is better for me. My in-laws are more than happy to have us here, but my husband is still sulking and gives me an annoyed look whenever his parents say something about his habits that he doesn't like. Am I the idiot? You are the idiot. Did you consider that there may be a reason your husband doesn't want to live with his mother? Also, dropping do this, or I'm leaving in a marriage is unhealthy. Not only do this, or I'm leaving, but it's also do this, or I'm leaving with your unborn child and won't be back until after their birth. What a crappy ultimatum. Understandable that you want support, but to upheave the entire household and move in with in-laws just because. Sorry, but that's the nuclear option in marriage. What do you say if he says fine and then you don't get his mother because you left him? Everyone around you has to change their lives around because you're afraid. Of what exactly? Grow up, lady. You decided to have a child, not them. Your self-centered, entitled attitude is out of control. I talked to a therapist about anxiety as it can and might only get worse from here. Your doctor must be informed that you moved into your in-laws' house because you're too scared to be alone for labor or when the baby comes. I disagree. Opie is not the idiot. When people ask for help, they're the bad guy or girl. When they don't, they're also the bad guy or girl. What the heck do you people want? She said she needed and wanted help and that she'd like to stay with her mother-in-law because they would be happy to help her. Why is this a problem? If this was her own mother, would anyone blink an eye? Childbirth is a big deal. It's natural to feel some anxiety as a first-time mom. How fortunate that she has supportive in-laws and a good relationship with her mother-in-law. My wife, 31 female, and I, 36 male, had been married for 2 years now, and she has a very regimented wellness and mindfulness routine. She wakes up at 5 a.m., does yoga in the spare room, goes on a quick run, and comes home to make a smoothie using one of those loud Nutri Ninja blenders, and will get on with her day. She also meditates in there, journals, and does other things that I can't disrupt her because it's her personal time. She was like this before I met her, and it was clear that if I wasn't on board with this aspect of her routine, she doesn't want to pursue anything with me. While I'm not thrilled she has the whole room for herself, I did ask if I could put my PC in there so it's not in the dining room space. It was there before I moved in with her, so I made my peace with it. My sister's coming to town with her partner and young daughter, young grammar school age. We both agreed to let them stay with us to save money. My wife wants them to sleep in the living room because we have multiple comfortable sofas for them to sleep on. While there was enough room, I made my case for buying air mattresses for them and setting them up in my wife's spare room. I also asked her if she would part with her smoothie making at least until they wake up so they aren't disturbed in the morning. My wife is vehemently opposed to giving up her room and smoothies. She doesn't think the room will be comfortable for them. No carpets, and it's got huge windows and massive mirrors on one wall, and says that if I'm using this situation to disrupt her routine, which I apparently hate, I'm not sure where she got that from since I've never asked her to change it. We're in for a disagreement over where they should stay, and my wife is even threatening to not allow them to stay and have them get a hotel for the visit. Am I the idiot? I don't think giving up the room is that hard to ask for my family's comfort, and it's only 3 days. As someone who's currently in the throes of a deep, dark depression, I feel like your wife's routine was possibly born out of an absolute necessity and that it may be the thing that keeps her functional. I would say that she was very clear with you about how important her routine was, so I think you are the idiot for wanting her to change it. I do also understand that she may be seen as non-accommodating, but it was never a secret. Some things that look selfish are more than what they seem from the outside. I don't care if he agreed. Anyone who needs to run a blender early in the morning with guests is selfish and needs therapy to work through their issues. I'm a creature of habit too, but that's not an excuse for rudeness. She needs to work through her issues in therapy. Dominating an environment and being unable to care for others is a big issue. Also, people can readjust their positions and evolve over time. Then the guest should stay in a hotel. They can also readjust their positions. She made it clear she has a routine. She's trying to work with you by letting them stay with y'all, but you're so desperate to interrupt a routine that's somehow bugging you that you refuse to see it. Perhaps you should ask yourself why you are so resentful of this routine. Is it because it's her time with herself and she isn't paying attention to you? Or because you're jealous that you don't have that same dedicated time allotted for you to have your time? Look at yourself and figure it out soon. Update. Thank you for all the advice, everyone. I've decided not to push this issue any further with my wife, and my sister and family can use the sofas, or I'll pay partly for a hotel for them. I do plan on asking my wife about her routine. She thinks that because the living room and kitchen are separated by a room, there's no need to muffle the blender sound on top of more than we already do with the insulation pads and a shut door. My wife, 28, has recently gone back to work after a long break after our daughter, kindergarten, was born. She's experienced a few hard days at work. I, 32 female, thought it might lift her mood up a little bit if I cook something for her with the I don't cook around the house because of my work schedule, but I decided to do it for her to help boost her mood. We made our dining room into a restaurant. I got us both chef hats and matching aprons, and we cooked. While cooking, we made a bit of a mess in the kitchen. We were almost done when I got a call from her. She said her mom, my mother-in-law, they live in a different state and we barely see each other, had come to pay a visit and ask me to prepare the guest room if I could, and said she'd be home shortly. So, I panicked and couldn't clean up before they arrived. They came home to a messy kitchen and my daughter acting as a restaurant manager. My wife adored the whole thing, but her mom immediately said how we lived with all this mess was disappointing. She said serving someone food like this in their home was ridiculous and made fun of the process. My wife told me to just let it go, but somehow I felt like a huge idiot because the timing could not be worse and my wife, and I stayed up cleaning the mess that night. Am I the idiot? Your mother-in-law is the idiot with no notice? What was it, a surprise inspection? You did something wonderful with your daughter, and she'll always remember it. Your wife isn't upset. She has more love for you because you did it. Not the idiot. Mother-in-law can stay at Motel 6. Motel 6 sounds like an appropriate punishment. Do you know what is ridiculous? People showing up unannounced, staying for the night, and daring to complain and mock you and your kid. Perhaps she'd be happier somewhere else, like her state. What an idiot. What kind of relationship does your wife have with her mother that, even though the mother-in-law lives in a different state and you had zero notice, she was showing up? I would not be cool with that at all. Your mother-in-law being judgy and rude blows my mind. Cooking makes things messy, and she was a last-minute guest. Not to mention the restaurant thing is adorable. Oh, honey, Your mother-in-law needs a reality check and a respect for others check. The second story is, I tested my girlfriend to see if she loved me for my money, and it backfired horribly. Al looked at Tori, who deftly took the roll with the stick and put it in her mouth. She acted as if she had been going to restaurants since childhood, although she lived in a small apartment and worked as an accountant. Tori looked great. It seems that she has rich parents who constantly pamper their daughter, and she doesn't get out of the spa. The girl licked her lips and smiled at him. Al met Tori at the gym. He came to run on the treadmill, and Tori was engaged in walking. A conversation began between them. She turned out to be a very interesting and quick-witted girl, so the young man's head quickly went around. Al was fascinated by her sincerity and spontaneity. But then, relatives and friends began to give advice to the guy. Al's mother said that he chose a girl for himself from the category of those who only need money from a man. His mother reproachfully expressed, his father supported her with a displeased expression on his face. Al tried to think differently. He was fine with Tori. He didn't believe that she was a windy girl or a liar. But those around him stubbornly imposed a completely different opinion on him. Therefore, condemnation settled in his soul like a heavy stone, no matter how much he wanted to get rid of them. But Al increasingly began to notice the fact that he began to treat Tori differently than before. He constantly tried to find a catch in her behavior. He wanted to understand if she was really interested in him or if she only needed his money. And one day, he decided to talk to Andrew, his good old buddy, about Tori and his parents' relationship with her. Andrew said, Tori is a 100% hunter for wealth. Don't you yourself understand this? Do you think she earns money as an accountant for all this beauty? Al swallowed hard. Do all girls look beautiful only thanks to beauty salons? If a girl is well-groomed, then she is necessarily a hunter for wealth? He had many thoughts in his head, and each thought gave birth to a new doubt inside. Andrew spoke with a sly smile. And you check her out. Give her some expensive jewelry. If she agrees and accepts the gift, then she is definitely the same hunter. Al decided to try. Before that, he gave Tori only flowers and invited her on a date. And now he decided to buy her a gold chain with an emerald pendant, which would perfectly match the color of her eyes. When he presented the gift, Tori didn't refuse. She calmly accepted the chain and said that she had not been given such expensive gifts before, and she was very pleased. Al didn't understand anything at all. How should he perceive her behavior now? She's actually a hunter for wealth. Or an honest adult who doesn't want to waste her time needlessly rejecting gifts and bickering, just because pretty much everyone does it out of sheer shyness. He had even more questions, and Al didn't know how to find out exactly what Tori wanted. The man was embarrassed to directly invite her to draw up a marriage contract. He believed that he should share everything with his wife, at least in half. If not, give her everything, because she would support him and keep the house comfortable, because she would bear him children in the future, because she simply exists and that she chose him, although there are a lot of men around. His father sat at a family dinner noticing his son's condition. Al didn't quite understand him. What? His father advised. Pretend to be bankrupt. It's simple. Tell her you've lost everything and live for a few days in a rented apartment. Take public transport and see if your beauty girl stays with you or runs away from you. Al liked his father's proposal. The thought was actually correct. This way, he would be able to make sure that Tori loves him. Otherwise, he didn't want to think about another scenario, but at least he would not make the most serious mistake in his life if the girl disappeared. He would not marry the girl who needed only his finances. And now, as they sat in the Japanese restaurant, Al looked at Tori and prepared to tell her the lies he'd come up with overnight. But his tongue didn't want to turn. Al started. Tori, something happened to me. And he paused, noticing her worried look. This is probably the last time we have dinner at a restaurant. Tori was surprised. Why? You say that like you want to leave me. Al said with difficulty. No, they blocked all my accounts. Here's what's left of my cash. My apartment was also sealed, and my business is on the verge of bankruptcy. A bunch of checks from the tax and other nonsense. I'm not sure that I can afford all this, even if I return to work as a simple financer. Tori forced a smile and lowered her head. At that moment, something inside Al broke off. It seemed to him that he said goodbye to the woman whom he considered the best in the world. Tori didn't say anything else. And when Al saw her off, she just kissed him sparingly on the cheek and left. It's been 3 days, and Tori hasn't called him or even texted him. Al wanted to dial her number, but didn't dare. She made a decision and chose not him. So she didn't really love him. The man played this thought over and over in his head. However, 6 months of a happy relationship couldn't just disappear from his thoughts. They left an indelible mark. Al wanted to talk to the girl and sort out the situation. He even considered telling her that he lied about his financial situation. But then, Tori would have returned to him solely because of the money. Such a relationship would clearly have lost its passion and sincerity. Al began to frequent the cafe that he and Tori often went to when they were walking along the promenade together. He bought himself a coffee, sat down at a table, and looked out the window. In his mind, he returned to the moments when they wandered along the shore holding hands. He remembered her smile, jokes, stories about work, and his soul became very heavy. Tori strongly sunk into the soul of a man, and she didn't want to leave from there. The rings of bells on the cafe door brought the man back to reality. Al glanced towards the entrance and froze. Tori entered the cafe. She smiled with some sadness, as if she didn't expect to see him and was not glad to meet him. But she sat down at Al's table anyway and greeted him. The man remarked, "Hi, Tori." He had no idea what they could talk about. Only a week and a half had passed, and his soul went to his heels as soon as he saw her. And in that second, he was ready to confess everything and ask her to come back because he missed her. He went crazy without her. The girl started first. "How are you doing? I see that everything is fine with your business. I recently saw your interview on TV." Al opened his mouth, but closed it because the waiter came, and he could at least gather his thoughts a little to properly express what was on his soul. Tori ordered ice cream and coffee with cream, and the waiter left. Al looked at the girl. It was hard for him to even breathe, being next to her and realizing that she couldn't belong to him and that all her love was feigned. And now she approached him, most likely because she saw his interview on TV. "Tori, I have to tell you something." Al hesitated to reveal his lies, although he wanted to tell her that she had failed the test. She whispered, "Speak." Al said and lowered his head. There was no bankruptcy. He had no idea where this conversation would lead, but he had to open his soul and tell her that she broke his heart and maybe he would feel better. "You decided to test me. I knew about it from the very beginning, even when you started talking to me then. Why do you think I decided to disappear from your life?" Al's eyes went wide. He felt restless in his soul, as if he had been circled around his finger, or were trying to do it now. "Then why didn't you say it right away?" Tori pursed her lips, turned to look out the window, and said, "Did I have to tell you something? Almost from the very beginning, I felt distrust on your part. When we first met, I felt so warm and good with you. I was sure that I had found the very man I could rely on, whom I could trust, and that it would be mutual. But it didn't last long. After meeting your parents, I felt pressured. It hasn't let go of me for a second since that day. You started acting like you were eyeing me, like you wanted to catch me red-handed, like some kind of thief. And after meeting your friends, you began to find fault with me for all sorts of trifles. Al, do you think I didn't see the face you gave me that pendant with?" Tori touched her fingers to the chain that hung around her neck, and then she unfastened the clasp. She took off the chain with the pendant and placed it in front of the man. You are waiting for me to start reacting like those naive girls who are waiting for such a gift. But when they receive it, they begin to pretend that it's so unexpected. You and I are both adults. Why did you have to arrange this test for me? Why didn't you trust me? Why do you doubt me? Didn't you feel my sincerity and love? Al had nothing to say. His temples throbbed and all the words were scattered in different directions. There was a void in his head. That's why Tori looked at him with such sadness then. She knew everything. She felt. And she didn't want to talk because she was in pain. The waiter brought Tori's order. She drank coffee and started eating ice cream, and Al didn't know what to say to her. He just sat, looked at the chain she took off her neck, and was silent, realizing that he himself had broken his love. If you gave me a second chance, I would fix everything. That's the only thing Al could say. Why would you need a second chance? Tori took the money out of her purse and put it on the table. She rose to her feet and looked at the man. You are too dependent on someone else's opinion, and I need a reliable person who will love me and trust me even if everyone around is against me. Unfortunately, people don't change at the snap of their fingers, and I don't believe that this will not happen again. Sorry, I have to run. I was glad to meet you, but that's all, and please don't try to find me, and better. Tori thought for a moment, sighed heavily, and added, don't try to bring me back, but reconsider your behavior and attitude to life. You can't be led by someone else's opinion all your life. Tori is gone. It was hard for her to be around Al, but she understood that his test and distrust would not allow them to be truly happy. She couldn't stay near him, and he just sat, looked after her, and couldn't move because he actually screwed everything up and let go of the person who could replace the. The third story is, my wife had an affair with our butler right under my nose. You won't believe how I found out. 10 years into our marriage, I became very wealthy thanks to the percentage of ownership I had in my father's company. So, I bought my loyal and lovely wife a mansion for us to live in, which came with a butler who was prepared to take care of all the undesirable chores. My work schedule was pretty spontaneous because I could visit the office as I pleased or work from home. Our marriage and life together for the next 20 years after that were blissful other than some odd moments and occurrences. One day, I arrived home from work to find the butler with my wife, standing side by side doing dishes. She was drying, the easier part, but I didn't understand why she was willingly doing any of the chores and standing so close to him. Their elbows touched a few times, and I coughed to let them know I was there. My wife jumped, but he just moved away from her a little bit. She said she felt bad he was in here all by himself, so she wanted to keep him company and help a bit. She was so cheery and warm, I couldn't tell if she had any ill intentions. Another time, I came home to find her lounging in the pool with the butler gardening and staring at her. They laughed a few times before I came out to greet them. It was clear that they were at least friends, but I didn't like how friendly they were. I thought I was just being controlling and jealous, so I accepted that my wife was friends with and cared about the butler. What was the harm in that if I trusted my wife of 17-ish years at this point? We spent every moment I wasn't busy together. I loved her, and I could tell she loved me. Yet another odd occurrence was when I walked upstairs to find the butler closing our bedroom door. It had been hours since I was upstairs because my wife was still sleeping. It was odd, and I asked him if she called for him. He jumped when I spoke and turned around sheepishly, although I could tell he wanted to act normal. He stammered and said she called to ask him for some water. I accepted that for a moment, but reminded him that he was not to enter our bedroom or open the door. He didn't know what to say besides, "Yes, sir." He walked away quickly, and I opened the door to find my wife in her panties drinking water. I asked her if the butler saw her like that, and she said no. She just took off her robe again. I was skeptical. I was heavily considering hiring a new butler. It seemed like she was flirty with him, at least, and I didn't like that he was most likely in our bedroom with my wife in her panties. Before I could terminate him, I saw him smelling my wife's panties. I know. It's really bad, really ballsy. I caught him on the security camera. I told him that was unacceptable and made my wife really uncomfortable. I didn't even tell her about it, but when I told him she was uncomfortable, he instantly looked like he didn't believe me. That ticked me off. I told him he was fired. I hired someone else, this time a female maid since I knew my wife was straight. I decided that even if I was jealous and protective, it was a smart decision. 1 week later, I arrived home to find the maid outside gardening. I went upstairs and found the butler I fired coming out of our bedroom once again, except this time he was dressed in regular, but still kind of formal, clothes. He looked at me like he was amused, but inconvenienced because I was there and saw him. I asked him what he was doing in my house again, and he told me my wife hired him for something else. He said it with such nerve. All I wanted to do was punch his smug face. I told him to leave and not to come back, no matter what my wife told him. As he walked away, I went into the bedroom and found my wife wearing a skimpy little nightgown. I asked her what was happening, and she looked nervous. She said I was home earlier today than the week before, and I told her she always knew my schedule was spontaneous and not to change the subject. She turned red and told me I was freaking out over nothing. I asked her why she couldn't explain why she was here in her skimpy nightgown after the butler I fired just came out of the room. She was pretty stunned and said she hired him back for things around the house the maid couldn't handle. I asked if one of those things was helping her with her personal plumbing and lubrication. Her jaw dropped, and she couldn't look me in the eye. Her cheeks must have been burning. They were so red. It looked like blood vessels in her face were showing up. It was crazy. Her face never turned that red in all the 30 years we were together. She finally said in a weak voice that if he did help her with that, it was nothing against me. I told her that it most definitely was against me because she belonged to me. We were life partners, and only I was permitted to help her with her plumbing and lubrication. She said she wouldn't ask him to help her again, and asked me not to worry about it anymore. I asked if that meant she was admitting to sleeping with him, and she was silent. She nodded yes very minimally, with her eyes watering. Then she started speaking really fast about how it didn't matter. She just considered it a job, nothing meaningful that would take away from our marriage, and she needed me to forget about it so that nothing changed between us. I told her this was most certainly going to change things between us, and it already took everything away from our marriage. I told her we were over, called her a name, and told her to get out of my home. I was extremely careful to get a postnup signed after I came into more money. It's not that I didn't trust my wife at the time, it was because my father and I were lawyers, which means I couldn't ever be made the fool. So my wife sorrowfully packed her bags. She had too many bags for someone with nowhere to go. The butler came to pick her up in the car he afforded with the paychecks I gave him. They stayed in a motel where the butler had been staying after I fired him. My wife had so many belongings, clothes, that she had to leave some of it behind, which I immediately told the maid to sell on eBay or keep for herself. They stayed in that motel as long as they could, but their money ran out without me signing the checks. They tried to contact me, individually, blaming each other for what occurred and asking me to take them back into the mansion. It was gratifying that they were turning on each other and failing to survive or do anything with their lives. Even to this day, my ex still tries to ask me for help and gives me some updated sob stories about where she is in life. It is not glamorous. It's far from what she was accustomed to with me. I've become something like Bruce Wayne in town, and I have no complaints. Even though her betrayal hurt, I knew from the moment I found out that I could recover from it. Not because of my money, but because I know what love is. And it wasn't that. Opie, I am sorry your wife couldn't see what a great life she had with you. I honestly feel like the attention and sexual tension she experienced with the butler was too much for her immature brain to handle. It was a man in close proximity to her that she shouldn't sleep with, no matter how much he would have been willing. He obviously paid her attention, and when their friendship developed, she couldn't keep her legs closed. I believe she was egotistical and materialistic, and didn't have the respect she should for her providing and loyal husband. What this type of woman needs to understand is that resisting temptation pays off in the end. No man should be able to convince them to disrespect themselves and their spouses by breaking their vows and trust. I'm not sure what happened in your wife's head, but we are all here for you to offer support. Now, let's get into our second story for today. One fateful day, when my wife went to work, she forgot her phone. I took the opportunity to check it and was appalled by what I found. I should have known what was going on because my wife, 25, was extremely excited about going to work suddenly. She said it was because she became in charge of a business task that she really enjoyed. It was something like designing different abstract images each day for a newsletter. I, 28, believed her. She was a good girl, and I was proud of her for earning us additional income for living expenses. The only other dead giveaway was that she didn't want to have sex as often, but then I knew why. It was because she was sexting with a coworker, sending pictures, and talking about the sex they had. It was disgusting. I drove to her work immediately. I backed up all the stuff for her phone, because although she wasn't getting it back, it was going to be deactivated. I brought it with me and started by showing the receptionist, who I only met once before. Then I asked her if I could get a guest pass to go have lunch with my wife. She giggled and gave me one. She knew I was sarcastically infuriated, and this was gonna be a heck of a show. She followed me in, putting up a "be back in 5 minutes" sign that she scribbled out. Everyone looked up from their desks to see me. I must have looked determined and angry. I asked everyone to gather around, and they did. I said I had some news to share about somewhere they all knew well. They were all sparkly-eyed with gossip endorphins when they found out who I was talking about. People started looking around for AP and my wife. AP came out of the bathroom just then, and we all looked at him. I announced that there was a guy who had the audacity to sleep with my wife. Some of the co-workers started shouting out insults at him. Among these, he was called despicable. Just then, my wife's head peeked out of her office. When she saw everyone looking at her, she went back inside and shut the door. Now everyone knew what my wife and AP looked like naked. Some girls whispered that they knew something was going on between them. Coworkers took the time to print/draw signs that said slanderous insults and taped them on my wife's office door. I thanked them for their creativity and left, wondering where the boss was that allowed all this to happen. When my wife got back to the house, I already had the locks changed. She took the stuff I let her have to AP's house. They both quit their jobs that day and walked out shamefully. In our town, there was just one major employer for like half the population. So, when I shared with people the things my wife talked about and took pictures of, everyone in the area knew about it or saw it. It didn't take long for them to decide to move about 500 miles west. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. Since she moved out of state, our divorce was made final through the mail. She didn't ask me for anything, thank God, but I would have been able to prove her infidelity anyway. She was done with me and the embarrassing past she was trying to forget. I felt the same way about her and couldn't be happier with the choice I made. Opie, I am sorry your wife behaved like an untrustworthy office cheater. It's hard to get as low as a person who cheats on their spouse while utilizing their trust to earn income for the family. What are they even working for if not to improve the life they have at home? If they honestly believe the person they start an affair with at work or anywhere is better than the spouse they have at home, they're wrong. The grass may seem greener on the other side. Finding a person with a new set of features, issues, habits, goals, and interests is completely unnecessary. It is only a shame when a marriage or union ends because one spouse thought they found better in someone else or just thought they could effortlessly manage two serious relationships. Really, the only grounds for divorce, the proper way to end a marriage, is when one person absolutely cannot or will not honestly communicate with the other person. Thank you for sharing this story. I appreciate your bravery and bold confrontation. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. The final story is she cheated with a 42-year-old man who lives with his parents and has a restraining order. My shocking discovery. Hey folks, welcome back to my channel, Relationship Haven. In today's story, Opie found out his wife cheated on him with a guy that is nothing like Opie. The guy is broke, has a restraining order against him, and still lives with his parents at 42 years old. Now, she claims she wants to reconcile. In today's second story, Opie found out his wife cheated on him with her adopted brother. Now, let's get into today's stories to find out what happened. I'm contemplating divorcing my wife of 16 years and mother to my 4-year-old son. In January, she revealed she had been having an emotional affair which began 6 months earlier. She had just broken things off. I was in shock hearing this. I thought we had had a loving relationship and a wonderful life together. Things weren't perfect, but overall there was a lot to be happy about. We both had rewarding careers, a child we completely adored, and a beautiful home. I saw us as best friends, and there was no one I would have rather spent time with. However, it's fair to say that the degree of intimacy in our relationship waned several years prior to our son's birth, starting with a long bout of infertility and continuing after we conceived our son through IVF. Infertility and being a new parent took its toll. We struggled for 9 months raising a baby who suffered from severe colic. One time, our baby was screaming so loud that a neighbor called the police to do a welfare check. It was rough. The colic subsided, but bedtime still seemed never-ending. It was only very recently that our son moved out of our bedroom to start sleeping in his own room. I don't think the word exhaustion does justice to the feelings we've mutually experienced. In my mind, there were challenges of parenthood, ones we shared equally. When my wife expressed worry about the lack of intimacy in our life, I knew on the one hand that she was right, though I didn't know how to change things. On the other hand, it seemed like the demands of being a new parent offered a reasonable explanation. I also believed that intimacy was something that could or would ebb and flow, more the former in those early trying years. My wife didn't feel the same way. I think she saw our lack of intimacy as a failing in our relationship and was deeply unhappy about it, more so than she was willing to admit. Then she met her affair partner and was somehow awakened to the true depth of this void in her life. We started seeing a couples therapist in the fall. Unbeknownst to me, her affair was playing out in parallel. I felt a deep distrust after learning about my wife's emotional affair, and small details nagged at me. Was this exclusively an emotional affair, or did more happen? What was the extent of their relationship, and how meaningful was it to her? Over the course of several months, I uncovered many details that weren't really volunteered, or rather, I was able to dig up information through my own investigative efforts. For example, data recovery, monitor emails, checking browser history, and so on. With each new detail came a new revelation, and I learned that much more had happened than I was first led to believe. My wife went out of town on 3 overnight trips during the past fall and winter. Each time I gave her my encouragement. She was leaving to work on writing projects or go snowshoeing with friends, and I believed these were activities to be nourished. I stayed home and took care of our son. Later, I learned that she met up with her affair partner on every single trip. I learned that they had exchanged sexually explicit pictures and videos. Unfortunately, I saw some of this material too. I learned that they had sex on many occasions. They told each other, "I love you." At some point, they envisioned a future together, but needed to be patient while biding their time. However, in January, my wife decided to break it off with her affair partner. Things did not go well. She was on the receiving end of abusive and threatening text messages. My wife became very controlling with regard to her affair partner. I was urged to block his phone number and email address and Instagram account so that he could not try to contact me. I was made to feel that he was a mentally unstable individual, an unpredictable person that I and we should be afraid of. I started sleeping in my son's room, which is on the main floor. I wanted to be sure I would hear if he tried to break in. He would drive by in the middle of the night and throw bags of things on our lawn. The police were called. Unfortunately, that's not where things ended. We continued to go to therapy, which shifted its focus to the affair. However, my wife was unable and unwilling to completely sever contact with her affair partner. They continued to text. He bought her a Valentine's Day gift. She bought him a birthday present. They continued to see each other. They were still intimate with one another. One day, I slipped my phone into our car, turned the GPS on, and watched her drive to his house and stay there for 2 hours. It's hard to grapple with all the things I've dealt with, and it's hard to reconcile how my wife could allow herself to be in such a toxic relationship. Her affair partner is the polar opposite of me. He's unstable, broke, and lives with his parents. He's 42 years old. His ex-partner has a protection order against him, and he has only limited and supervised access to his own children. I don't know what to say. I love or loved my wife. I love our family. This is not what I wanted. Opie, here are my thoughts on the situation. You are aware of what has happened. You need to gather evidence and talk with a lawyer about your options. You do realize that as your wayward wife continues this facade, you're putting your own child's safety and well-being at risk. She's checked out of this marriage, which you're hanging on to and using lies, deception, and gaslighting as a way to keep you as a doormat. Check your state laws as to reasons for divorce. If you live in a no-fault state, it may make things harder for you. If you do seek legal advice, have any visitation on the part of the wayward wife stipulate no visitors of the opposite sex while having visitation, since you already know the affair partner is mentally unstable. Let's see what the comments had to say about this situation. Kranick said, "I know that you deeply love your wife, and I'm very sorry that you're in this situation, but you are no longer just together with her. You are responsible for your son now, as well for his mental and physical well-being. Where do you think your son will be when your wife wants to see her affair partner while she has to look after your son because you're at work or somewhere else? She needs to learn that she destroyed the bond you once had, that all trust and respect is lost. Not that you have to fight for her. She walked out. She betrayed you. If she wants this marriage to survive, then she has to fight, not you. It is your job to show her that you no longer tolerate her affair, her disrespect, and her selfish, entitled behavior. Build up a bed in your son's room and sleep there. Ignore her presence at home unless it is about the kid. Stop going to marriage counseling. That is good for nothing for as long as she lies. Tell her that you will not even shake her hands before she meets with a doctor and gets tested for STDs now and in 3 months. Then do the most important step. Go to a lawyer, prepare the divorce papers, and serve her with divorce papers. Now, let's get into today's second story. This is my first time posting, so please bear with me. This happened to me just a couple of days ago. Let me provide some background. I've been with my girlfriend for 1 year. She has 2 kids of her own. I myself have 1. Our story starts way back in 8th grade. She was my first love. I moved to Los Angeles, which led to us separating, and of course people move on. Throughout the years we kept in touch here and there. I always knew I loved her and would from time to time think about her. Last October, I reached out to her, and we began to reconnect. Shortly after we started dating. Last May, we discovered she was pregnant. She is now 5 months along. Now to the present day. We now live together and have been preparing for the baby's arrival. Things had seemed to be going pretty well for the most part, but for the past couple of weeks I had noticed her acting very strange, especially in regard to her iPad, which is connected to her phone. So all photos, texts, and calls are registered to it as a result of having it synced. She's a hairstylist, so she would leave it at work in her locker or in her car. About a week ago, she asked me to watch the kids while she went out to work for a couple of hours. While at home, I heard her iPad going off, so I went ahead and checked to see what it was. The messages she received were from her older adopted brother. He was adopted at a very early age by her father before she was even born, from my understanding. The messages began neutral, nothing out of the ordinary, until the really awful stuff started to show. The messages led into lots of sexting and nudes being sent from her to him. They also planned days to meet up when she wouldn't have the kids with her so that they could have sex. However, this is where it gets confusing. Throughout the text messages, she made excuses as to why she couldn't have sex, but could only hang out, even though she was clearly scheduling days to see him. A few hours later, she arrived home, and I confronted her about the entire thing. Her response was that he took advantage of her a couple of years back while she was drunk, and from there it started to become a common consensual occurrence. She eventually put a stop to it, but recently it had started back up, and she had been trying to get him to stop pursuing her by sexting him and cutting it short because she didn't want to lose her brother. She also stressed that they haven't had sex recently. She just saw him 2 weeks ago. It all sounded like bullshit to me, so I packed up and left. I'm shocked, and now I've had doubts that the baby is even mine, because I can't believe anything she says. A part of me wants to understand and even go back to her for the baby's sake. I don't know what to do at this point. I'd appreciate any advice. Opie, here are my thoughts on the situation. You need to get a paternity test ASAP and then also let her parents know what happened so she doesn't go around spinning the narrative. You also need to contact a lawyer and get an STD test. I wish you the best of luck with your situation, Opie. Thanks for taking the time to listen to today's stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and comment below on what your thoughts are on today's stories. If there's a story you'd like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Take care, everyone. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you have your own funny or unbelievable story, leave it in the comments or send it to us. Maybe we'll feature it in our next video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share laughter with your friends. See you later on